If you're passionate about transforming retail operations and improving performance, plus you're accountable for key change projects and programs in your company, then you're in the right place. Welcome to the Retail Transformation Show with me, Oliver Banks. Hey, Oliver Banks here, and welcome to the Retail Transformation Show. This is episode 45. Now, the world is changing, as we unpacked in the last episode, in episode 44. There are many things which continue to evolve and change how we are living and how we are shopping. And these are fundamental changes. Do not expect things to revert. Of course we shouldn't. You know, the internet is not going away anytime soon, right? Our insatiable desire for connectivity isn't going anywhere. The highly competitive nature of the retail market will not change going forward. This is the world that we live in. It's digitally enabled. You could say it's just our normal now. You could say it's our new normal. And that brings me on to introducing you to our special guest today. He's the author of a brand new book, a brilliant book as well, I might add, Reinventing Retail, the new rules that drive sales and grow profits. So today, I'm absolutely delighted and excited to welcome Ian Shepherd onto the Retail Transformation Show. Ian comes into this eyes wide open to the evolving and changing world that we live in. And his book is exploring this in much more detail, as you're about to hear. Ian has held a number of very senior positions at leading retail and consumer-facing businesses, including Managing Director at Sky Interactive, Consumer Director and Strategy Director at Vodafone, Chief Operating Officer at Odeon Cinemas and CEO of Game Group, the video game retailer. So he's very familiar with the challenges facing retailers and very much recognises that it's not a simple answer to really move the industry or any particular business forward. Now, what you are about to hear right now is a fantastic conversation. And it's just the first part as well. This is the first of two parts. So make sure that you hit subscribe and do not miss part 2. I promise you, you will not want to miss that one, I tell you. So without further ado, here is the first part of my conversation with Ian Shepherd about reinventing retail for the new normal. Today, we're joined by Ian Shepherd, who has just released a brand new book, Reinventing Retail, which is a fantastic read. Ian, welcome to the Retail Transformation Show.
Oliver, good morning, and thanks very much. It's great to be here on the show.
Well, it's fantastic that you're here. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. We've got a couple of different episodes. This is obviously the first part, so if you are listening, remember to hit subscribe and come back next week for the second part. Ian, I have to say, you've done a fantastic job with the book. It's a brilliant read. There's a ton of really actionable advice, which I personally love. It's nice to have something interesting, but until you take action, that's where the value is in my personal view. So firstly, big congratulations and big kudos. Well done.
Well, look, you're very kind to say all of that, and what particularly stands out for me in what you've just said is this piece about actionable and practical advice. I think there's a real danger we're all facing when we look at the challenges that retailers up and down the high street are facing. We're all looking at the same problem, and there's a wide community of people out there trying to offer help and advice. And I think that, you know, for me in writing Reinventing Retail, one of the questions that you face is, you know, have I got something extra to say? Have I got something additional to offer? Because there are, you know, loads of and fantastic, intelligent retail observers and advisors and consultants out there. You've had many of them on this show. So what could I possibly add? And you know, what I wanted to add was the fact that I've actually been there, sitting around those board tables in retail and hospitality businesses, and so I've had to in a very practical way, roll my sleeves up and think, well, what do we do in this situation? And so what I've tried to capture with Reinventing Retail is a set of, as far as possible, kind of really recognizable and practical observations about what's happening, and therefore, discussion about what retailers around the world might do about those things.
Well, I think it's brilliant. And that valuable experience that you do bring, as I say, having had those senior roles, getting your hands dirty, really doing this stuff makes it so authentic. So I think that's really valuable for anyone that is in a retail position and is facing challenges. This is someone sharing their experience that has been there, done it, got the t-shirt of it. So highly recommended. And actually, Ian, you go right from the beginning. You share one of the most defining moments of your career, that stepping out onto the street at 2 a.m. And I'm going to let people dive into the book, pick up a copy of the book and understand what's going on there. But I'd like to just dive into a few words right at the beginning of the book, just to kick off our conversation, really. You say, "But we make a terrible mistake if we think that means we should let established retail brands fail without a fight. If there is to be technology change, and if consumer needs evolve, so be it. But there is no fundamental reason why it can't be existing businesses who evolve with them to capture those opportunities." And then you go on, "Those businesses which are really thriving are the ones who are actively thinking about these kinds of fundamental existential implications of the new normal." And that's new normal with capital N's. And that's a really big part of the whole book, Ian. But let's just get all on the same page. What do we mean by the new normal? Can you explain, please?
Yeah, thank you for picking out that section, which I do think is a really interesting introduction to this discussion. What I was trying to capture there in the introduction to the book is that in some senses it's self-evident that the reason that so many retail and broader consumer businesses are getting into difficulty now is because the world has changed, and the most obvious and direct way in which the world has changed is in the sort of the way that technology has evolved over the last 2 decades. So we now have all of the information in the world available to us, on our mobile phones 24 hours a day. So instead of, I think I used the example in Reinventing Retail of, kind of buying a fridge. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when buying a fridge meant getting the bus down to wherever the electrical retailer was and looking at the fridges and looking at the different specifications on the price labels and writing down some prices. And if you wanted to do some price competition, you then had to get another bus to the next shop and take more notes and eventually you just gave up and bought the thing that was in front of you. Now, one Google search will give me all of the makes and brands and specifications and price points and every retailer's offering for every fridge in the world ever on my mobile phone. And that has obviously changed the world. And it's that kind of perfect, imperfect, noisy, cluttered information world in which we now live, which I dubbed as the new normal for the want of any kind of better terminology, just to capture that change from a couple of decades ago to today. What I'm then, going on to say, because the first half of the book that then really goes to try and examine that new normal in a bit more detail, is that there's a very direct set of implications of the fact that we live in that world. So if you're a retailer, the very direct implication of the existence of the internet is that you're going to need a website. You're going to need to be selling online, and fine that for much of the last kind of couple of decades, a lot of the effort that's gone in around retail board tables has been, well, okay, there's now an internet. We need a website. We need to tool up for that. We need to, oh goodness, now we need a mobile website, and maybe we should do some social media stuff. That's all fine, and it's vital. In fact, it makes sense. But that's only really addressing the very direct consequence of the new world in which we live. And what I've tried to do in the book is go one step beyond that and talk about what I call the second order impacts of the new normal, which is that world, that chaotic information world that I've described, doesn't change mechanically the way we buy things. It also changes the way that we as consumers decide what to buy. And so, the way we identify brands, the way we compare products, the way we form relationships with businesses, the way we share our experiences and opinions with each other are all entirely different now than they were a couple of decades ago. And each of those also has big structural implications for what it means to be a retailer today. And they become effectively, in the end, a manifesto for change and evolution for retailers. It's not enough just to have a website and social media feeds, and it's not enough even to have invested in kind of clever omni-channel integrated technologies. Actually, you need to go one step further than that. I was with a retail CEO friend this week, and I can't name the brand, but it's a brand that you would put. They're not dead. They're not in the kind of they're not in terrible trouble, but they're definitely at the beleaguered end of the high street retail brands. And yet, actually, when I look at their offering today, actually many of the omni-channel modern boxes, they tick really well. They have a great website. It integrates with the store. They expose their store stock levels to the website, so you can check whether a product's in your local store. Their social media feeds are pretty rich and good and link directly back to give you the ability to buy the product. And yet they're still struggling.
And it's interesting because if you were to take that situation and you were to rewind, say, 5 years and say, here's my proposition, you'd be like, wow, that's absolutely everything you should be doing. Perfect. Crack on.
Correct. Because it ticks all of those first order, all of those direct boxes in terms of, well, we now live in an internet-enabled world. But the reality is their consumer has changed. Their consumer is considerably more demanding than they once were. They have many more choices than they once did. They're just that their needs and wants have evolved even beyond just, can I shop with you seamlessly through multiple channels? And so they're having to address the store experience that they deliver and how rich and involving and immersive that is. They're having to address issues of customer data. Do they know who their most valuable customers are, and are they able to do something meaningful with that information? They're having to address all sorts of aspects of the experience that they deliver for their customers on top of the kind of technological multi-channel stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they'll succeed. They're engaged in an amazing kind of change program. And it sounds, I'm at that particular brand, I'm pretty optimistic about, but that is the reality of being any high street retailer today. And that's why the extract that you were kind enough to read out before, what it came immediately after was a piece where I said, there is a kind of cold-hearted economist's view of the world that says change happens. New technologies emerge, new businesses arise, old businesses get consigned to the dustbin of history, and that's just okay, isn't it? But of course, it's not okay.
Proverbial evolutionary, do or die.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not okay, in my opinion. And the reason it's not okay is because it affects livelihoods. It affects, thousands of people. 75,000 jobs have been lost in retail in the last year. That is a magnitude of industrial change, which if it was happening in the, in manufacturing or in steel or in any other industry would be front page news. And what happens for us is in retail, it drips out sort of business by business. But the reality is there's something very painful going on that has impacts not only for people who work in retail, but they have impacts for wider society as well. An empty high street is very damaging to a town. So it suddenly the restaurants and the bars and the hospitality business go as well. And you only have to drive around this country to see just how all pervasive the damage of an empty high street can be. And so my mission really in reinventing retail is to say, actually, yes, retailing has changed. What it takes to be a successful retailer has changed. But actually, I think it's within the power of those of us working in and running retail businesses to change and evolve our businesses to match that. And you see that there are, great retail success stories doing fabulously well right now that give us the evidence of that.
Absolutely. And we often overlook those as well, don't we?
We do. And I would be as bold as to say, I really struggle to think of a retail business that has failed or shrunk or gone into administration or had a really tough time over the last decade where I think that was inevitable. And I include the ones I've worked in. So if I was looking at this and thinking, it is just Darwinism. It is just, inevitable that, old retail businesses disappear and new technology businesses arise. Then I wouldn't have written the book. But the reality is, I think that if you are, I think I used the phrase in Reinventing Retail, if you're established business with its brand, with its customer relationships, with its supplier relationships, with its expert colleagues around the country, is driven out of business by a new entrant who starts with no brand and no money and no customer relationships and no supplier credibility. What does that say? That's extraordinary when you think about it that way. And so actually, I think there's something very important here about both identifying how it is that retail businesses need to change and evolve for the new normal, and then talking about, which I think we'll talk about probably in the next episode, the second half of the book, is let's talk about how difficult that change is and why it so rarely happens. So what I'm trying to do in the book in the first half is really codify some of the things that retailers need to be facing into. And then in the second half of the book, talk about how to make that happen.
Yeah, and it's absolutely such a critical part, that second part. And we're going to, like you say, dive into that much more in the next part. But right now, you mentioned that you're on a bit of a mission to save retail, so to speak. And in the book, you've got 6 rules that help to grow sales, grow profit, and ultimately continue to evolve in our ever-evolving world, the new normal. Just guide us through those 6 rules, Ian, if that's okay.
No, very happy to. And what I try to, I don't, by the way, suggest that these are the only rules of the new normal, or that in some way they represent a kind of end-to-end. A degree more humility than that is required. These are effectively, me offering an opinion about things that I've observed and that I think retailers should have a think about. And what I've tried to do with the rules of the new normal is to face into the stuff that's really difficult. That it's, in some senses, it's too easy to write the retail transformation book that says some version of you should have nicer stores and do more stuff on the web. As a retail leader, you read that and you think, duh, I knew that. But how do I cope with the fact that whatever price I put my product out at, somebody online undercuts me by 10%? Because that's the real reality of being particularly a specialist retailer in the new normal.
All at your fingertips whilst you're standing in the shop.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, I told the story before of a friend who worked in a business where he had the story that they accidentally priced a product at £1 instead of £10 on their website, and 24 hours later, Amazon was 80p.
Yeah.
And that is, that's a particularly kind of brutal algorithm in action. But the reality is some version of that is happening all the time. And that's why rule 1 of the new normal in the book is somebody's going to sell your product at cost or even less than cost. I was in the video game retail business, but, people selling DVDs or books or, other kind of products like that have experienced their products not only being sold below their own price level, but actually being sold below wholesale cost. We had several experiences in my time running game of seeing, for example, supermarkets selling video games for £3 when you buy your groceries. That's a kind of price competition, a kind of intensity of price competition that we just didn't see, I think, 20 or 30 years ago in quite the same way. And so there's quite an extended section at the beginning of the book talking about this first rule of the new normal and trying to offer some thoughts about, in the real world, how do you cope? Because wishing that that's going to go away is not the answer. So, we talk about, the pricing strategies that might help people cope in an environment where that very sort of mechanical, straightforward price competition is as brutal as that. I then go on to say, you talked about there are 6 rules, and just briefly the following 5. The second rule, it says everyone knows everything. A great retail example of this is that, once upon a time, if you were selling electrical goods, you made all of your money on the extended warranty because that was a huge 70%, 80% margin product, and you were making virtually nothing on selling the computer or the television itself. The trouble is now, in a world of perfect information, your customer knows that you're making a big margin on that warranty. They're making an entirely different decision about whether or not they want it. And by the way, they have other places they can go and get the warranty, so you're being undercut.
You can get it separately, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You're being undercut on that sort of source of margin. And so, that world of, the customer knowing everything, again, changes the nature of the way you run a retail business. And it's that section in the book is an opportunity to start to talk about a really, really important concept for retailers, a phrase that we've all used a million times, but very few retailers have really embraced properly, which is the concept of customer lifetime value. So the idea that the value of the relationship you have with a customer is the sum of everything that they do with you, not just about an individual sale at an individual point in time.
An individual one basket or
Exactly.
one trolley, whatever it is you're selling.
Exactly, and we're often in retail blind to that because of something we'll come on to talk about later, which is the absence of kind of good customer data. And so actually, it's very tempting to say, if I can take this particular transaction and make a bit of extra money out of it by leaning on the terms and conditions or charging an untoward premium. I mean, the classic consumer industry example here is your car insurer trying to charge you more for insurance because you're loyal and give a better deal to new customers that have just walked in the door. That kind of practice and behavior is very tempting when you see every customer transaction is somehow distinct from every other one. But once you understand the value of your ongoing relationship with the customer, you don't behave that way. And so that rule 2 of the new normal is all about that. The third rule we go on to talk about is called reputation matters, and that's obviously always been true. But the reality for a retailer, and indeed any consumer business now, is that in the new normal, the way brands are formed is entirely different than it once was. They're formed in conversation, they're formed in social media, they're formed in online discussions. There's a wise marketeers used to say your brand is what people say about you when you're not there. And what's happened with the internet is there's just a lot more rooms that you're not in where people can talk about you.
And you can be there if you want as well.
And you can. And so in that section of the book, we talk about the importance of exactly that. In fact, we talk about the importance of really understanding what people are saying about your business online. But we also talk about the importance of empowering and enthusing your colleagues all around the business to represent the brand that you want it to be. So your social media teams, but also your teams in store. What are they saying about you? What do they think about you? Because the reality is that in this world of your brand being formed in conversation, if you have colleagues in store who are really not that loyal to your business, they really don't appreciate what you're doing, they don't feel rewarded or looked after or valued, well, I don't think there's any way they could help but share some of that attitude with the customers who are buying from them. And those are your customers. That's where your revenue comes from.
Absolutely, yeah.
So actually, when I talk to retailers now in the round about the new normal and what they might do about it, we find ourselves talking about culture and values and empowerment much more than we find ourselves talking about digital technology. Because the reality is one of the biggest unnoticed consequences of the new normal is that it now matters enormously more than it did 10 years ago, whether or not your employees like and respect your brand and want to be nice to your customers, because that's your main way of building your brand. The fourth rule of the new normal, then we talk about location. So this is, really kind of core stuff for many of the retailers listening to this show, which is, I have stores, but what are they for? Because, once upon a time, in my fridge example, stores were essentially distributive in nature. You had stores because that was where people bought products, and they could only buy the product that was in the store, and it was costly to them either in time or money to go from one store to the next. And so essentially stores were places that you got product into customers' hands.
Yeah, thinking back to that sort of fridge shopping example.
Exactly.
We've all been there.
Yeah, and in that world, it made sense to have as many stores as you possibly could justify because you wanted to be stumbled over by as many customers as you possibly could. That distributive thing led to, I think, something which is very obviously in the DNA of many retailers today, which is the first thing I do when I have a decent year's trading is open a load more stores. That's where that comes from. The problem is, in the new normal, I don't need your store just as a way of finding and discovering a particular product, because I can do that on the internet, much more easily. And in fact, the internet can show me many more products than you can possibly show me in your store anyway. So the role of a store has changed. Stores are now about experience. They're about recruiting customers to your brand. They're about making active sales and upsales and linked sales and doing all the things that you can do in a physical store environment, which are harder to do on a website. And I think there are many of those. I list in this particular chapter in the book 6 great reasons to have a store, even in the new normal. But they're different reasons than they were a couple of decades ago. And because they're different, that means that the type of store that you need is probably different than it was a couple of decades ago. And the number and location of those stores is also different than it was a couple of decades ago. And that fundamentally changes the nature of the retail estate that a business needs. And I, we talk in the book, about ways in which retail teams can embrace and try and kind of get their heads around that and do something and really review, what their stores are all about.
Yeah. This is so good. If you're listening and you're driving or you're on the train or at the gym, whatever, I hope you're finding this so valuable, because it's like, I remember going through the book and it's just like, yes, I totally agree. So I hope you are finding that. And if you are, remember, pick up a copy of Reinventing Retail. Ian, we've got a couple more rules. Just very briefly guide us through those.
Thank you. Rule 5, very close to my heart as somebody who comes from a sort of subscription media background, is about customer data. Knowing your customer is key. For most retailers, and you've talked about this in previous episodes of this show, if their most valuable customer, the person who buys most from them most frequently, suddenly stops buying from them, they won't even notice. And you can't run a business that way. I grew up in subscription, as I said, in Sky TV and in the mobile phone industry. And in any of those businesses which have very good quality, rich customer data, you will find that they spend more money on customer retention than they do on customer acquisition. The retail industry spends basically zero on customer retention because it doesn't know who its customers are. And so we talk a lot in this chapter about the importance of customer data, about how to get it for a retail business. And that's obviously at one level, that's the business case for a loyalty card. But actually, there are other ways of gathering customer data as well, which we talk about in the book, and about the kind of value that you can generate from that. And then finally, the 6th rule of the new normal, kind of brings some of the others together. It says if a product can be simplified, it will. And I use there the example, which is, as we're talking, now in the summer, people are going on holiday. As we used to buy package holidays, and now what a lot of people do is they dismantle that product. They buy the flight and the hotel and the various experiences that they might go on separately, because again, the new normal gives them the ability to do that. And that's an interesting thing for a retailer to think about. Why would I buy sets of product together? What does that mean for the power of curation and sort of linking products together with customers? I used the phrase somewhere that if you use a department store as an example, department store business exists to bring collections of products together in ways that customers will appreciate. But there's a very fine line between this is an inspiring collection of products that I want to see together versus what a hodgepodge of stuff thrown together in a shop.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a critical point that you see some hodgepodges out there, and you can go to Amazon or any other website and find equal sort of ranges with much more convenience.
Yes, exactly. And so I think, ironically, having said it, the chapter 6 is about disintermediation, really, this thing about products being simplified. But actually what I end up doing is talking about the sheer power of curation. And actually there is a really, really viable strategy for retailers in terms of how they bring a subset of products together, because precisely one of the problems that e-commerce businesses have is that they give you millions of search results. And actually it can be quite difficult to separate out the good from the bad or the wheat from the chaff. And so, one of the roles of a store, one of the roles of a retailer in the new normal is precisely to kind of cut through a bit of that. So there they are, 6 rules. As I say, there are many more that people could come up with for themselves. But what I was trying to do is really capture the way the world has changed for retailers and some of the topics that they really need to be kind of leaning into and thinking about as they reinvent their businesses.
I think they're a brilliant set of rules, and I particularly love that you make it actionable as well. So for each one, there are different sort of ideas, questions that you can ask to scope out what it is that you could do differently in the new normal. Is there, just very briefly, and just before we wrap up this episode, is there a particular rule that you think most retailers come up against, the biggest challenges, the most difficult rule?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there are some challenges in all 6 of the rules. I think the thing that's most visible for many of the retailers who are kind of going through a reinvention process today probably is that piece about the role of the store.
Yeah.
Because firstly, it has changed in such a fundamental way. But secondly, I'm going to sound a bit disrespectful now, but it's too easy to give a glib answer to the question, what is the role of your store? Because I've heard a lot of people say, well, obviously in the new world, our store is about experience and discovery and curation.
Yeah, fill in the buzzword bingo game, right?
Yes. And then I go into their store and think, that's not what I'm seeing at all. What I'm seeing is, you've bought some product, you've stuck it on shelves, and you're basically hoping that I walk in and buy it. And that's a way away from the kind of customer-focused, CLV, customer lifetime value oriented, relationship based retail business that many retailers' annual reports would suggest is what they're going for. And so I think that particular section, I find myself talking to retailers a lot about what is your store actually for? And once you've answered that question, and as you say, there aren't quite worksheets in the book, but there are certainly sections encouraging retail teams to go and have this discussion. Once you've worked out what your store is for, that's going to leave you with some very uncomfortable realities about how many of those stores you need and what you want them to look like and feel like for your customers, and how you react to that, what you do about it, which gets you into the second half of the book about how to create change. That's a really, really mission critical conversation for retailers today.
Absolutely. And let's wrap this one up here. That whole second part of the book, as you say, is all about making that change and making it actually happen, which is certainly right at the heart of my beliefs around, if you don't make a change, nothing changes, and you haven't actually done anything. So it's all been talk. So you actually got to make it happen. And that's what we're going to be diving into in the next episode. Ian, thank you so much for sharing a ton of value here. The book, once again, Reinventing Retail, the new rules that drive sales and grow profits. Ian Shepherd, thanks very much.
Oliver, thanks so much for having me.
So tell me, what did you think of that? Was that not a fantastic conversation with Ian there? I have to say, I really enjoyed his book, and I do thoroughly recommend you pick up a copy. It's Reinventing Retail, available in all good bookstores. And if you'd like a link to that, or if you'd like any of the other info, you can find all of that on the show notes page from today, ob&co.uk/45. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, why not reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter? Ian and I are both there, so you could tag us both. Ian on Twitter is Ian A. Shepherd, and I am Ollie_Banks. That's OLLIE_Banks. And of course, we're both on LinkedIn under our own names. And if you've not already done so, make sure you hit subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. We've got part 2 coming at you, and new episodes are released every single week. So hit subscribe right now. And I will look forward to joining you next time on the Retail Transformation Show. Have a fantastic week.